In the Ottoman Empire, a millet was a separate legal court pertaining to personal law, under which a confessional community was allowed to rule itself under its own system. After the Ottoman Tanzimat reforms, the term was used for legally protected religious minority groups, similar to the way other countries use the word nation. The word millet comes from the Arabic word millah and literally means nation. The millet system of Islamic law has been called an example of pre-modern religious pluralism concept. The millet system has a long history in the Middle East and is closely linked to Islamic rules on the treatment of non-Muslim minorities living under Islamic dominion. The Ottoman term specifically refers to the separate legal courts pertaining to personal law under which minorities were allowed to rule themselves, with fairly little interference from the Ottoman government. The concept was used even before the establishment of the Ottoman Empire for the communities of the Church of the East under the Zoroastrian Sassanid Persia in the 4th century. People were bound to their millets by their religious affiliations, rather than their ethnic origins. According to the millet concept, the head of a millet, most often a religious hierarch such as the Greek Orthodox Patriarch of Constantinople or, in earlier times, the Patriarch of the East, reported directly to the Ottoman Sultan or the Sassanid king, respectively. The millets had a great deal of power. They set their own laws and collected and distributed their own taxes. All that was required was loyalty to the empire. When a member of one millet committed a crime against a member of another, the law of the injured party applied. But the ruling Islamic majority being paramount, any dispute involving a Muslim fell under the Sharia-based law. Later, the perception of the millet concept was altered in the 19th century by the rise of nationalism within the Ottoman Empire. Millets. After the decline of the Assyrian Church of the East in the 14th century, until the 19th century beside the Muslim millet, the main millets were the Rum millet, Jewish, Armenian and Syrian Orthodox. Armenians formed more than one millets under the Ottoman rule. A wide array of other groups such as Catholics, Karaites and Samaritans was also represented. Muslim communities prospered under the Ottoman Empire, as the Sultan was also the Caliph. Ottoman law did not recognize such notions as ethnicity or citizenship. Thus, a Muslim of any ethnic background enjoyed precisely the same rights and privileges. The Muslim millet united different populations regardless of ethnic and linguistic distinctions. Turkish, Arab, Kurdish, Albanian and speakers of Caucasian languages. However, even if caliphate played a significant role, the real existence of these feelings is questionable long before the Arab Revolt and the subsequent dissolution of the empire in the 20th century. By the 17th century, the Maghreb regencies were only nominally under Ottoman control and Egypt was almost independent by the beginning of the 19th century. Creeds which were seen as deviant forms of the Caliphal dynasty's Sunni Islam, such as Shias, Alawis, Alevis and Yazidis, had no official status and were considered to be part of the Muslim millet. Only the syncretic Druze of the Jebel Druze and Mount Lebanon enjoyed feudal-type autonomy. These groups were spread across the empire with significant minorities in most of the major cities. Autonomy for these groups was thus impossible to base on a territorial region. Orthodox Christians. The Orthodox Christians were included in the Rum millet, or the Roman nation, conquered by Islam but enjoying a certain autonomy. It was named after Roman subjects of the Ottoman Empire, but Orthodox Greeks, Bulgarians, Albanians, Georgians, Arabs, Vlachs and Serbs were all considered part of the same millet despite their differences in ethnicity and language and despite the fact that the religious hierarchy was Greek-dominated. Nevertheless, ethnonyms never disappeared and some form of ethnic identity was preserved as evident from a sultan's firman from 1680, that lists the ethnic groups on the Balkan lands as follows: Greeks, Albanians, Serbs, Vlachs and Bulgarians. The ecumenical patriarch was recognized as the highest religious and political leader of all Orthodox subjects of the Sultan. The Patriarchate and the Archbishopric of Ohrid, which were autonomous Orthodox churches under the tutelage of the ecumenical patriarch, were taken over by the Greek Phanariots during the 18th century, in 1766 and 1767 respectively. Armenians until the 19th century. There was a single Armenian millet which served all ethnic Armenians irrespective of whether they belonged to the Armenian Apostolic Church, the Armenian Catholic Church or the Armenian Protestant Church. Only later did a separate Catholic millet emerge. Non-Armenians from churches which were theologically linked to the Armenian Church were under the authority of the Armenian Patriarchate, although they maintained a separate hierarchy with their own patriarchs. These groups included the Syriac Orthodox and the Copts. Syriac Orthodox. The Syriac Orthodox started out under the Armenian Patriarchate but petitioned the Sublime Porte for separate status, mainly as Western contacts allowed them a voice of their own. Thus the Syriac Apostolic Church of Antioch and all the East received recognition as a separate community, millet, as did the Chaldean Catholic Church, the Syriac Catholic and the Millet of the Church of the East. The last was the most remote of the churches in distance from the Porte. Jews. Under the millet system, the Jews were organized as a community on the basis of religion, alongside the other millets. In the framework of the millet they had a considerable amount of administrative autonomy and were represented by the Hakam Bashi, who held broad powers to legislate, judge and enforce the laws among the Jews in the Ottoman Empire, and often sat on the Sultan's divan. The Ottoman Jews enjoyed similar privileges to those of the Orthodox. The city of Thessaloniki received a great influx of Jews in the 15th century and soon flourished economically to such an extent that, during the 18th century, it was the largest and possibly the most prosperous Jewish city in the world. The Jews, like the other millet communities of the Ottoman Empire, were still considered a people of the book and protected by the Sharia law of Islam. However, while the Jews were not viewed in the eyes of the law to be on an equal playing field with Muslims, they were still treated relatively well at points during the Ottoman Empire. Norman Stillman explains that the prosperity of medieval Jews was closely tied to that of their Muslim governors. Stillman references the time between the 9th and 13th centuries in which Jewish culture blossomed as medieval Islamic civilization was at its apogee. That is not to say that the Jews weren't persecuted during this time and that as the empire declined in centuries to come the Jews' condition did not worsen. However, given their rampant persecution in medieval Europe, many Jews looked favorably upon millet. In the late 19th century, such groups as the Bilu, a group of young Russian Jews who were pioneers of the Zionist resettlement of Palestine, proposed negotiating with the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire to allow a millet-like settlement. That is not to say that they sought to replace the old Jewish millet system, for they sought much greater independence. However, it is important to note that the Zionist movement did not reject the millet system in its beginning. Following the collapse of the Ottoman Empire in the wake of World War I, Palestine came under the control of the British Empire, who decided to create the State of Israel. The millet system that Israel adopted upon its independence was a highly pluralized and decentralized legal system under which the Ottoman and British imperial authorities granted juridical autonomy over matters of personal status to 11 ethno-religious communities in Palestine. The reasoning behind Israel's implementation of such a system upon its religious and ethnic minorities remains unclear. From an ideological standpoint, it is surprising that the Israeli government, a Jewish state, advocates a system of government modeled in many ways off the same millet system which once represented the oppression and persecution of Jews. Furthermore, This approach to the governance of their state has been met with a great deal of criticism by both those inside Israel and those in surrounding Arab countries. Yüksel Sezgin, a professor of comparative politics at the City University of New York, claims that Israel has not attempted to put an end to the multiplicity of religious courts and unify them under a network of national courts, as Egypt did in 1955. Rather, it has maintained a modified form of old Millet system in which religious courts of 14 state-recognized communities, staffed with their very own communal judges who apply religious and customary laws of their own communities, are granted exclusive jurisdiction over matters of marriage and divorce and concurrent jurisdiction with the civil courts in regard to issues of maintenance and succession. In other words, Israel utilized the old Millet system in the nation-building process as an instrument of vertical segmentation and horizontal homogenization. The new notion, Sezgin suggests, of Israel's government as a new Millet system should not be confused with the Millet system of medieval Islam. Under the Ottoman Millet system, for example, a Jew's word would always mean less than a Muslim's in a court of law. Members of the Millets were truly second-class citizens who were legally inferior to Muslims. Israel's new Millet is more a practice of separate but equal, in which all members of the state are equal but subject to different legal systems, according to religion and ethnicity. While the claim may be made that Israel's system lacks modernity, it is perhaps a step too far drawing a comparison between it and a medieval theocratic structure of government. Roman Catholics. After the fall of Constantinople, the only Latin Catholic group to be incorporated into the Sultan's domain were the Genoese, who lived in the Byzantine capital. Over the next decades, Turkish armies pushed into the Balkans, overrunning the Catholic population of Albania, Bulgaria, Bosnia and Hungary. In the Orient, the 16th century saw the Maronites of Lebanon, the Latins of Palestine and most of the Greek islands, which once held Latin Catholic communities, come under Turkish rule. Papal response to the loss of these communities was initially a call to the crusade, but the response from the European Catholic monarchs was weak. French interest, however, lay in an alliance with the Turks against the Habsburgs. As a bonus, the Catholics of the Ottoman world received a protector at the port in the person of the French ambassador. In this way, the Roman Catholic Millet was established at the start of the Tanzimat reforms.